second conversation today is featuring Fiona McAnena from Clearhound. Fiona, before we start talking about nudge theory and behavioural economics, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about Clearhound. By your accent, we know you from here.
Yes, and I went off to university in Cambridge to read natural sciences, and while I was there I discovered history and philosophy of science, which is much more about developing your own point of view and making a case, and I found that I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah.
And from there I went into business, and I went into marketing, which is sort of the bit of marketing, the bit of business where it's about developing your own point of view, it's about exploring markets and customers and consumers and figuring things out. It's about creating solutions for them and then persuading your colleagues inside the business that it's the right thing to do. And so that's the work I do. I've done that for a number of big multinational organizations, Unilever, PepsiCo, WPP, and I've also done it as a marketing consultant where I've worked with lots of different clients and lots of different areas of business and lots of different industries. Helping them with their marketing challenges. And Clearhound is my business where I work as an advisor to businesses in the area of strategic marketing.
Okay, you mentioned there a couple of big box producers like Unilever and things like that. What were the products you would have worked on?
So I worked on, well, probably the best known one, everybody's favourite actually, is Dove.
Oh, okay.
Everybody loves Dove because of the Dove Natural Beauty campaign and all that stuff. I worked on introducing Dove to the UK. Dove was invented in Italy, actually. Italy, I think, maybe the US, but it was developed in another country, and they brought it over, and then they wanted to introduce it to new markets. So I worked on it very, very early on. I worked on Persil, which was, and still is, sort of the nation's favourite washing powder. And we always used to say, if you can work on categories as dull as washing powder and make it interesting, then you can work on anything.
Okay, so when we were kind of talking, we talked a couple of weeks ago in depth about the whole idea of behavioural economics and nudge theory, and it was fascinating. When you talked about nudge theory that day to me, I was kind of like, this, I haven't come across this before, So I went off and researched it, and you kind of said, oh, you're doing your research, but what I found fascinating was the more I read up about it, the more ideas were going off in my brain about it, So maybe like from your point of view as a marketeer, talk us through like nudge theory.
All right, so let me start with a little example that could be happening right here in this cafe. So if somebody comes up to you in a restaurant, the waiter or waitress comes up to you and says, you say, I'd like some water, and they say, still or sparkling. What they're doing is they're nudging you to buy paid-for water rather than tap water, which is not very helpful to you, but very helpful to them.
Yeah.
Well, that's a nudge, because you still have the choice to just say, oh no, just tap, if you don't feel embarrassed about that. Because the whole model is based on the fact that you'll kind of go along with it, and that's the default. So they're creating a default option, which is you have bottled water and you pay for it, and you have to make a little bit of effort to avoid getting the bottled water and getting free water. That's an example of nudge theory being used, I would say, in the interest of the business and not the interest of the consumer.
Yeah.
What's going on there is that whereas business used to think that people were all very rational and you could persuade them, and the job of advertising was to persuade, and you had to get the right facts and give them the information and they'd make a good choice. Or governments used to think that if you would tell people about what's healthy, just tell them that smoking's bad for them, just tell them to exercise, just tell them to save for their pension, that they would do the right thing. Nudge theory has demonstrated that, in fact, that's not how we work. We are not what units of maximizing utility that the economists would have us think of human beings. And human beings don't make their decisions by carefully weighing every possible piece of information and then making a choice. Why? Because a lot of the time it's not that important. Or you don't have all the information, or you don't know how to decide, or something just sort of biases you. So nudge theory is about uncovering all those ways we make quick choices, which are called heuristics, and all those biases that we have that we're barely conscious of, so that they can be used, I would say, so they can be used for good rather than for bad. So the restaurant nudging you to pay for bottled water, you can see what they're doing and you can get out of that. But a lot of the time there are nudges going on that you're barely conscious of. And sometimes they nudge you in a good direction, sometimes bad. Okay,
just this idea, I suppose, like of those kind of like indirect nudges, and those very, like, I wouldn't call them sleight of hand nudges because they're not sleight of hand. They're very, very elaborate. One example we came across was the Manchester City Council, when they were writing to people who basically were in arrears with different things. The language they used in that, it was just it was very slight. It was a brilliant result. So I'm very interested in this kind of, like, I suppose, the degrees of nudginess that can actually go through.
Yes. So just to cover that one first. So what's been going on is that in the US, there was a big discovery around this whole discipline of behavioral economics, and the American government started to try and use it to help people do the right thing. Right? We can argue what's the right thing, but we'll talk about that. And then the British Conservative government got very excited about it, and they set up a unit in the Cabinet Office called the Behavioural Insights Team, which is called the Nudge Unit.
Who's it bring over for that?
They recruited people in the UK, and they have been trying lots of different experiments in a number of areas. So we can talk about health in a minute. We can talk about charitable giving and pension planning and organ donation. All of these things are subject to little nudges. But the one you're talking about is the area that's probably the most work been done, which is about taxes. So the big problem that they're trying to solve is not everybody pays all their tax on time. And for years, it's been a huge area of public expenditure to advertise that you've got to pay your tax on time, which of course is our money too, being used to advertise, to talk to the people who aren't paying their taxes. So they've been experimenting with different ways to try and nudge people to do what they should be doing anyway. And they've tried lots of different control tests so they know what really works. It's not just kind of based on gut instinct, it's based on trying some things. So in one of the principles of behavioral economics is that social norms are very important. And some people would even say there's such a thing as a herd instinct among us, right? Which is you're more likely to do the thing you think everyone else is doing. If you think it's a normal thing to do, you're more likely to do it. Now that can work positively or negatively. So if, for example, you see a sign in the doctor's surgery saying, 400 people missed their appointments last year, that's meant to prompt you to not to miss your appointment. In reality, nudge theory says you're normalizing the skipping of appointments. That's the wrong thing to do. There's a very famous example of this actually from California, where there was a public park of a petrified forest, and all these pieces of petrified wood on the ground. And every year they had a problem that visitors to the park would take pieces away. So they were getting naturally very upset. They put up signs saying, every year, many, many pieces of this precious resource are lost because people pick it up and take it away. Well, again, nudge theory says, everybody thinks, oh, I see, everybody else is doing it. It's a tippy piece. So it's important to understand that almost nothing we do is neutral. You may be nudging people in the direction you intend, or you may be nudging the other way. So back to the tax thing. So tax is a big area where what they've been experimenting with is not changing the law or penalties or anything like that, but simply trying to reframe or re-communicate to nudge people in the right direction. For example, using the social norms, they've tested writing to people and saying, 90% of people in Northern Ireland get their self-assessment tax return in on time. In fact, they've not done it in Northern Ireland, they've done it in other parts of the country, but the equivalent would be writing to people saying that, or saying, 95% of people or 90% of people in Derry could get their tax in on time, or going even tighter and saying in your postcode area, this is the percentage of people. And what they've done by testing the same percentages every time, but with a big area, a smaller area, and then a very local area, is they've identified, first of all of those things in the communication improve people's compliance. But secondly, they've identified the best unit for that particular message is your local town. Because people sort of, you can hypothesize it's because we recognize that in some way the tax we all pay together contributes to our collective well-being. And maybe a very big unit you don't identify with in the same way, and maybe a small unit's a bit meaningless in that context. But that's a social norm being used to help people do the right thing in taxes. Another one is court fines. So there's a big problem with people having judgments made against them in the small courts where they get say a speeding fine or a whatever small fine, and they don't pay it. And so how do you chase them? Well, again, they've tested texting people saying, pay this money, texting people saying, Jim Carroll, we know you owe £100, pay this money. texting people. That not surprising.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
works, doesn't it? You sat out
Totally.
there.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I'll pay. I didn't know I owed it.
Well, there's a famous case in Dublin at the moment of a journalist from the Irish Times who was jailed for not paying his fine. So I'm just kind of wondering, do you know something about It's okay, that's the second example. Third example?
And so they've experimented with that, and then going even further and saying the amount. So Jim Carroll, so one is just to say you owe the money, you put your name in, put the amount in, and even put where to put it. And basically, if you make it easy for people to do things, that will work. But actually, if you personalise the message, they feel it's really a message for them. So that's working too. Now, the thing about that is, none of that is really public policy. None of it is changing the law. People still have, an important thing about using nudge theory is, the principle is, people still have the option to do what they would have done anyway. You're not coercing anybody, but you're just trying to find the little tweaks, the little nudges that encourage the right behaviour.
Yeah.
And so Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs have been big users of this, as you can imagine. One of the things they tried, this is an interesting one, they tried with doctors. So doctors are all self-employed, GPs are all self-employed, and they have to therefore declare taxes and pay them retrospectively. And there is a suspicion, far be it from me to comment, but there is a suspicion that not all doctors pay all the money that they owe. And so they've done an experiment where they wrote to doctors saying, here's how to pay your tax. They do that routinely. And then another sample, they wrote to them and they put some information at the top to make it very easy how to pay, where to pay, all that stuff. Good. That's good practice. That's good marketing, actually. And they did another one with a nice simplified information, and it also had a couple of statements up there about the medical profession. So very particular information about the profession, one of which was 97% of people believe that doctors are the most trusted professionals in the country. Based on some real research, or doctors are the most trusted professionals. And they thought that would nudge. In fact, the doctors didn't care about that. That didn't make any difference. The thing that made the difference was just the simplified letter that made it much easier for them to see how to pay, and that. But that did make a difference versus the old model, which is, those fancy, very complicated letters you get from the tax office. Yeah. So not every nudge works, and that's why it's a bit trial and error. Yeah,
it's very interesting. You said, the nudge theory kind of began as a movement in the States,
Yes.
And it's interesting to see how some people have reacted negatively towards nudge theory. Glenn Beck, for example, the right-wing firebrand came out and was a right-wing firebrand and said, this is all brainwashing, you're reading our brains, what I find really interesting at the moment is that over the last couple of months, because the British Conservative Party have taken nudge theory to their bosom, that suddenly it's everywhere,
It's everywhere.
Do you think in some ways that maybe by them embracing it like this, by a particular party embracing it like this, that in some ways it's downplaying and it's making it a negative thing?
Well, the originators of the theory, who wrote the famous book called Nudge, say that it is a principle you should adhere to. You should always check if what you were doing came out, would you be embarrassed? So the principle of transparency is that it's not subliminal negative advertising. It may be subliminal, but if it were spelt out to you, there would be no backlash. So I think that's very important, because there's nothing I've told you so far where you'd say, God, it's a scandal for doing that.
It just strikes me, it's very smart. Everything you've described so far is very, very smart. You can see why someone would do it, and you can wrap it into this kind of theory. So when it's transparent, everyone's going, that's cool, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, you say it's very smart, and certainly from trial and error, people are finding the right things. There are mistakes. So the petrified forest is one. There's another good example which comes from Freakonomics. Do you remember that big Freakonomics? Where there was a daycare centre that was having a huge problem. This was in Israel, a big problem of parents picking up late. And of course the staff can't go home, and they've already worked a long day, and it's all very frustrating. So they thought, okay, we're going to start fining people if they come late. So they put a sign up saying, if you pick up for every 15 minutes you're late, it's whatever size of fine. Well, unfortunately, all they did was they put a price on lateness.
Yes.
They turned it into a service. In fact, they normalised lateness. And it became, and by putting a price on it, nobody had to feel guilty anymore, because basically they could just pay for lateness. Now, as a marketer, I would have said, don't fine your customers. They're your customers. And they obviously have a need that you're not yet meeting. There's a business opportunity there, which is extended hours. In fact, why don't you find out if anyone wants early drop-off as well? Yeah. That's a business opportunity. They saw it as a kind of, fold your arms, how dare they keep us late. And maybe that's a bit of a public sector attitude, I don't know. But a business view would say all of this is about saying, let's understand what people want, what they value, what they'll pay for, how they're going to make decisions and choices, and then let's set that up to be good for them and good for us. Now, Glenn Beck, of course, doesn't like the government helping people at all. He thinks it's all about free will. But what's also been proven is that you can't really have no choices. You can't have an absence of framing the choice in some way, because even the way you lay things out, the order you effect, creates a default choice. Whatever, one of the big things is default. So if you say, tick the box if you want to opt out, that means the default is that you're opted in.
Yeah.
And most people will go with the default. So choosing the default is really important. And so for government, everything they do creates some kind of default. And so you have to try and choose the default that is going to be, if most people stick with that option, don't make an active choice, that it's going to be the one you want. So his thing about government shouldn't be shaping people's behaviour, they can't fail to shape behaviour, because as soon as you do something, you have a default. There's, the debate that's going on at the moment about organ donation.
Yeah.
Is that they should change the default. And there are some countries where the default assumption, Israel is one of them in fact, where the default assumption is that if someone has not filled in a form opting out of organ donation, that they're assumed to have opted in. And, the evidence is that most people are okay with that.
Yeah.
But, of course, changing the default creates a huge focus on the issue and a huge debate.
Right, okay. I suppose, we've talked a lot about kind of governments, how they're using things, how they're using kind of, nudge theories to, I hate to use the word kind of improve public behaviour, but use words, improve public behaviour, to do what they want them to do. In terms of companies, in terms of kind of like private enterprises and the corporate sector, have they embraced nudge in a big way, or is it still early doors there?
Well, they have always been much more into finding ways to present their choices, the things they can do for customers, in a way that's going to make them more attractive. And unlike government, they have a set of competitors that they're thinking about that offer the alternatives. So they have embraced it, but it's much more subtle, because it's more about thinking, how do we make this look a bit better? So, for example, some of the big telecoms companies and Sky, for example, have thought about how they bundle their pricing options to try and push people in a certain direction. So we've talked a lot about biases, the social norm being one, the default being another. There's the other thing I mentioned, the other kind of theoretical thing is heuristics, which is basically shortcuts for making choices. So there's a very famous pricing heuristic called the rule of three. The rule of three is, if you have three options, cheap one, medium one, expensive one, you'll tend to go for the medium one, because it's a way of saying, well, it can't be too bad. I don't want the cheap one. And there's a very good proof of that, which is a study. These are artificial studies, done in universities, where they create a little shopping centre, and in the wine section, 2 wines, $5.99 and $7.99. So out of 100 people, they'll basically choose the cheaper of those two 70% of the time. By adding another bottle at $14.99 to the range, suddenly everybody's buying the middle one. And they're selling a few of the expensive ones as well, and still a few cheap ones. Always a few cheapskates. But basically, they've changed people's behaviour, because what that's done is it's made it easier for me to make a choice. Because instead of thinking, I don't know which of these is, that's a bit cheaper, that's a bit more, by giving me 3, I go, oh yeah, the middle one, I'll be fine, can't go wrong with that. Apparently restaurants always sell most of the second from bottom price wine.
That goes back to, what's her name, Bridget Jones' diary. It was all about that. It's like never the cheapest bottle of wine, the second cheapest bottle of wine.
Right.
And don't ask me why I know that.
Yeah, very good, but don't ask.
It's nudge theory.
So using that pricing heuristic, the rule of three, lots of businesses have then said, okay, we'll make this easy for people. We'll always give them a choice of 3. So if you're bundling, newspapers have done it. News International have done it with their Sunday Times and Times subscription service, where you're bundling, your iPad access, your full digital online access, your weekly paper, daily paper, Sunday paper, all that. There are so many permutations of that. Now, Glenn Beck's approach would be to say, well, just give them a great big long list and they can choose everything they want, but people don't want to do that.
No.
So you could either say, you could use the norm thing, say, most people just have the weekly paper and then you could do that. What they've done is they've used the rule of three to say, well, let's first of all find out based on people's habits, what more people seem to want. So you do a bit of market research, you find out there are people who read the paper in the week and not at the weekend, they do something different, and then there are people who do the other way around. There are some people who mostly do things online, some people who mostly do things in paper. So they basically worked out for a small number of combinations that accommodate most people. And then, because life's too short to spend all your time choosing options, right? They've created 3 options: a cheap one, a middle one, an expensive one. And some people will undoubtedly say, I want to hear every word that comes from the Murdoch empire. I'm paying for all of that. And other people will go, well, I don't want to spend too much money or whatever. But of course, naturally, what they've done is they've made an easy default option, and most of us just go, oh yeah, I'll have that.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned earlier on there, Fiona, was that in terms of nudge theories and how it's being used was social enterprises, and charities. And maybe talk us through kind of 1 or 2 kind of case studies there, because I find this, when we talked on the phone, I remember kind of being really struck by this, because it was an area where, like, in terms of charities and getting people's awareness, and more importantly than awareness, getting people's money, can nudge theory be used to do that?
Absolutely. So one of the things that defines how we feel about stuff is loss aversion, which is it always feels worse to lose something than to gain the same amount. So, for example, and this is very famous test, that if you toss a coin, so I say I'm going to toss a coin, Jim. If it's heads, you're going to give me £10.
Right.
If it's tails, in order to do this, to take on this bet, so heads, I win £10.
Okay.
Tails, how much do you need to win to make it something you want to do?
£1,000. You shouldn't have tried this out of me beforehand.
So,
okay, say £20.
£20. And the majority of people, that's where they'd say, well, if I'm going to gamble losing £10, then my chance of winning has to be much better than that to make me feel okay with it, because losing 10 feels worse. Yeah. So what you've just said, losing 10 feels about the same as winning 20. And that's loss aversion. Losing something feels worse than gaining the same amount. Has to be more.
So what you've done is you've done the maths in your head. You've kind of realised, okay, she's like, if I lose this bet, I've got to give her £10.
Yeah.
So how can I make this worse? Think, okay, 10, yeah, 20.
20. So you wouldn't gamble losing 10 just in order to gain 10. You have to gamble losing 10 in order to gain 20. So how that works with charitable giving, and indeed with contributing to your pension, is that it's much easier to plan to do something in the future before you've got it than to plan to do it when you've got it. So, for example, when I next get a pay rise, I will give 1% to charity and put 3% into my pension. Okay, I'll do that. Why? Because it's in the future. Yeah. I don't feel any loss. I haven't yet had the money. Plus, if you also, what they've demonstrated is if you get other people that they know to email them and say, I'm doing this, why don't you do it? That's even more likely to make you do it. But so charitable giving, there are lots of ways that, when you get the little form that says, you get the mail shop and it says, tick the box, which gift you want to give. Well, they're fools if they put a £5 on there as an option, because they're anchoring your giving right down at 5, and then you think, well, if I give 6, I'm really generous. So if instead they put 50, 100, 500, they're anchoring at a much higher level. You then, of course, still have the option to give 6, but you're going to feel like a real cheapskate. You're probably going to give 20.
Yeah.
So the things like, or when the sponsorship form comes round, the first person, if I were doing a sponsored run, which I never do, I would get my parents to be my first sponsors, because they put a nice big amount on there, and then everybody else would give the same.
Yeah.
So that's anchoring. So charitable giving, you've got to really think about, of course, people always have a free choice, but what's the reference point that they work up or down from? How is it going to feel to them? Are they losing, or are they going to be not mine because they haven't received it yet? There's another study where people were asked, a number of people who were getting significant bonuses were asked before they got their bonus how much of it they'd give to charity, and on average the response was about 34%. Similar group of people, similar size of bonus, asked after they received their bonus how much they would give to charity. What do you think?
15%.
11%. Because they already had the money.
Yeah,
now
exactly.
You're asking them to give it away. So in terms of charitable giving, there are lots of sensitivities like that, and you'll notice none of that is anything to do with how good the cause is, how efficient the charity is, whether I'm personally affected by the work, all the stuff we traditionally think that influences the charities people choose, and that may well still be true, undoubtedly is true. But how much you get from those people may be an awful lot more to do with when you ask them, how you ask them, giving them a mechanism to do it before they've actually ever had the money, telling them that the majority of other people in their club or in their workplace or in their neighborhood or giving X percent away, all of those factors that influence people's behavior.
Right. I suppose the one area that, you know, nudge theories, I'm very interested in, just because we're in CultureTECH and because we're in Derry right now, it's just technology, you know, like have we seen like technology companies adopt things like nudge theories in any way, shape or form?
Great question. Absolutely. There is, well, yes, I think Amazon's a great example. The most important thing with technology companies is probably defaults, recognizing that if you make things easy for people, they'll go with the flow, and if you make it hard, they won't. Have you ever had the experience of wanting to maybe sign up to something, and the first thing they do is ask you for a whole ton of data about yourself? You go, oh, forget it, I'm not doing that. Asking people to sign up and give a lot of information before you've done anything for them is a bad idea. Whereas if you make it easy for people to get through the first few steps, and maybe, you know, they've gone all the way through and they've chosen what they want and they see all those stuff, at that point, because they've put some time in, they're much more willing to commit some more time in order to get what they want. So technology companies recognizing that it's not all, you have to design the processes as people move through websites or move through choices so that it's easy. That's one very important thing. There is famously supposed to be a $300 million button, and what that's about is a company, undisclosed, but it's believed to be Amazon, who realized that by creating the one-click option, they would generate millions of dollars of sales that otherwise they would not generate, just because if you make it really, really easy for somebody to just say, oh yeah, I'll have it, they're more likely to do it. So making it easy is, in some ways, is what technology is meant to be for, but in some technology companies can end up creating too many choices, lots of complexity, and that's making it harder, not easier. And so the challenge is, in a way, is to humanize the technology, and what behavioral economics is all about is saying, look, we're human beings, we're not machines, we're not 100% committed to any given product category or brand or anything else. So if people want our business, they have to work out what's good for us that we might like, and then just make it really, really easy to do.
Right. When clients come to you, Fiona, at Clearhound, you know, I mean, obviously they're after an increase in sales, they're after an increase in products. Do you reckon most of them understand like behavioral economics, or is it something that they've heard about? They may have read the book and kind of went, okay, I want some of that, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm very wary of that, because my role with clients is not to apply a particular theory, it's to help them be better for their customers in order to achieve better success for themselves. That's what marketing is. Figure out what it is that's important enough to people that they'll pay for it, that they value, deliver it to them in a way that's convenient and timely and everything else, and then you'll make money, and then that's a win-win. In that context, things like recognizing that people would really welcome one-click ordering, for example. I didn't come up with that, but in that context, that's good for both sides, and good marketing is a win-win. You know, so it's not that you're tricking people into doing things they didn't want to do. And of course, bear in mind that the theory would also say that you're not coercing people. They still have a choice to choose some other combination or construct their own set of options or anything else. But what you're doing is you're just making it easy and quick. And we all value our time now. So companies who take the trouble to properly understand their customers and what those customers would value, and then create product packages or service bundles that meet those needs, name them in a way that people can understand rather than have to puzzle over what on earth does this mean, create simple online processes or retail processes, whatever, multi-channel processes, so people can get what they want. Those companies deserve to be chosen by people, and so that's really what marketing is about. And in that context, nudge theory is one thing. There's one area that I think is really important, if we've time to talk about it, which is about health. And it's a big, so we talked about the government using nudge theory to get people to comply with the law, pay tax, pay their fines, all that kind of thing, pensions, all those things. There's a huge, as you know, a huge need to get us all to adopt healthier lifestyles. And again, if we were rational creatures, we would learn all the lessons, wouldn't we? We all know, so people would do the right thing. But hey, some people aren't doing the right thing. In fact, most of us are not doing the right thing all the time. And so nudge theory is about saying, well, how can we make it easy for people? So one lovely example of that, and you know that the USA has got a huge problem with obesity and all the illnesses that are related to that. You go into an office in any big city in the US, into the ground floor, The lifts will be right there. The stairs will be nowhere to be found. They'll be behind a door somewhere. And nudge theory can actually influence not only how you communicate, so you put a little map, or in fact, I know a London ad agency that has a big sign saying, ordinary people take the stairs, ordinary people take the lift, extraordinary people take the stairs. Oh, I'm one of those. I'm definitely one of those. Rather than, fatties need to take the stairs, which is clearly, you don't identify with that. So that's a nice positive nudge. So a purely rational approach to that would be give people information. But the test, you put a sign up saying, by the way, you should take the stairs. It's like 100 calories for every 20 stairs, whatever it is. People go, it doesn't really work. Making the stairs visible is the single biggest thing. And so actually, not only can you change people's behavior by different information and different messages, but over time it will actually should change things like how buildings are designed. So I think that tackling our health problem, which we know, is a huge, huge issue, is a very important area where maybe even Glenn Beck would agree that you could do things to make it a little easier for us all to do the right thing and make life better for ourselves, and collectively, of course, that would save us all money too. Right.
Okay. Final question, and thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing, because it's like everything you've kind of been saying, all the examples you've given, are just like bang on. What I'm very curious about is that, from what you're saying about the nudge theory and how it works, and how it kind of, like, I suppose, taps into our behaviour, there's nothing really new about this. What's really new is a name being put on it. Mm-hmm. Can you maybe do some kind of future casting? And 10 years from now, do you think we'll still be talking about nudge theory, or will it have evolved to something else?
Gosh, that's a really good question.
Thank you.
I think that there tend to be cycles in these things. So undoubtedly there are categories of business and public information where people can't be bothered to pay attention, or happy for someone to sort it out for them. And I think there's a cycle then where maybe people will start to question and say, well, actually, I do want to know a bit more. Mm. And so, with pension planning, for example, there's definitely a cycle where people started by saying you should give people lots of choice and da-da-da-da, and then they said, oh, no, people don't understand pensions, they can't spend the time, they make bad choices if you leave it to them. And because you don't know whether you've made a good choice or a bad choice until 20 years later, it's something where it's responsible for companies and governments to make good choices on, make the defaults good. Now, it may be there's a cycle where in some of these categories people start to unpick that and say, well, I know they made a default, but maybe I'm different, maybe I want to take a bit more information. So I think it will probably segment. There will be some things where, frankly, it's not important enough to us to spend time and energy puzzling over it and making choices. I'll be happy to accept defaults. There'll be other things where we care a lot and we want to get into the information, we want to think it through. There will even be increasingly, I think, some categories where simple bundles of choices are all you want. You really don't want a great big shopping list. And others where, because endless customization is possible, people will spend lots of time and energy and customize and make everything for themselves.
Cool. Fiona McAnena, thank you very much.
Thank you.
How was the game just there? How was the game just there?
Oh,
thank you very much.